A broke mechanic helped a stranded girl, not knowing she's a billionaire about to change his life. Have you ever run away from a life that wasn't yours? A desolate road, the wind howling through rows of snow-covered trees. In the freezing night, a car speeds down the icy path, headlights cutting through the darkness like a warning. She's running, but from whom? And why can't she turn back? Imagine this. You have everything, wealth, power, a life most people dream of, but in return, you have no choices of your own. Would you accept being a puppet or risk everything to find your freedom? Leave a comment right now. Would you stop and surrender to fate or race into the unknown to rewrite your own story? And if you love stories about courage, second chances, and love found in the most unexpected places, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Now let's dive in. Olivia Williams' breath came out in faint clouds as she gripped the steering wheel tighter. Thick snowflakes slammed against the windshield like 1,000 tiny knives, slicing through the night. She could see nothing beyond the road ahead, an endless stretch of white ice and uncertainty. There was no turning back, no more choices, no more time. Behind her, the distant echoes of her engagement party still rang in her head, the forced smiles, the calculated handshakes, and at the center of it all, Lucas Hill, the man she had never loved but had been chosen for her by her father. A contract signed on paper, not with a heart. She had spent her life in a world where everything had a price, except her own freedom. And tonight, she was breaking every rule. Her car sped down Cedar Creek Mountain Highway, tires skimming across the slick ice. Olivia kept her eyes locked on the road, but inside her, another storm raged even fiercer. If her father found out she had run, what would he do? Send someone after her? Erase her existence with a single phone call? A sharp crack split the silence. The tires slipped. Olivia barely had time to gasp before the steering wheel jerked violently from her grasp. The car spiraled. Metal screeched against the frozen asphalt. The world spun, a blur of dark trees, shadows, snow. Then, silence. The car slumped into a snowbank on the roadside. Headlights flickered weakly. The engine sputtered in protest before going completely dead. Olivia sat frozen, her heart pounding against her ribs. Shakily, she lifted a hand to her forehead. No blood, no wounds. She was alive. But then a new problem hit her. She reached for her phone. No signal. The cold began creeping through her thin coat. She glanced outside. The snowstorm was thickening. If she stayed here all night, she wouldn't die from the crash. She'd die from the cold. She bit her lip, battling with herself. Get out, search for help in the darkness, or stay put and wait for something, anything, to happen. Then through the swirling snow, two headlights appeared. Olivia's breath caught. Her pulse pounded. Salvation or danger? She couldn't see the vehicle clearly as it approached. Her heart pounded wildly. Had her father already sent someone after her? Or was it just a stranger passing by? The truck door swung open. A figure stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered. His voice cut through the cold night air. "Hey, are you okay?" Olivia clenched her fists, the chill tightening its grip around her body. Should she trust this man? Or was this just another doorway leading to a different kind of prison? "Hey, are you okay?" The deep, steady voice cut through the icy wind and swirling snow. Olivia Williams clutched her thin coat tighter and looked up. Before her stood a tall man, his clothes dusted with snow, sharp eyes assessing her, but without menace. He didn't wait for an answer. Stepping through the thick snow, he crouched down to inspect her car, the headlights casting sharp shadows over his strong features. "Your car's dead. If you stay here any longer, you'll freeze." Olivia opened her mouth to protest, then shut it again. She had no options, no phone signal, no one else but her and this stranger in the middle of the storm. "I've got tow cables. I can pull your car out." James Anderson. That was the name on the worn nameplate of the old truck parked across the road. A common name, but in this moment, possibly the only thing standing between her and the brutal winter night. Olivia nodded, stepping back as James moved to the rear of his truck. In the dim light, she caught a glimpse of a gray-furred dog sitting in the driver's seat, intelligent eyes watching her intently. James worked quickly, his movements strong and efficient. Within minutes, her car was free from the snowbank, but the engine still refused to start. Olivia could sense the unease in the man as he checked under the hood, his breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. "Your fuel's frozen. You're not driving anywhere tonight." She bit her lip. If her car wouldn't run, where would she go? James straightened, brushing the snow from his sleeve. His gaze flickered over her. Not unkind, but not entirely warm either. He had seen situations like this before. Travelers stranded, lost souls caught in the deadly grip of winter. But Olivia was different. Something about her didn't belong here. "Get in my truck. I'll take you somewhere warm." Olivia hesitated. Trust a stranger? But just then, another gust of wind sliced through the air, sharp as a blade, making her shiver violently. James didn't push her. He simply stood there, waiting for her to decide. Finally, she took a deep breath and stepped into his truck. The warmth inside enveloped her instantly. The dog in the passenger seat never took its eyes off her. A name was engraved on its collar, Rocky. "Don't worry, Rocky doesn't bite," James said casually, then smirked slightly. "Unless I tell him to." For the first time that night, Olivia let out a small smile. They reached Blue Ridge Diner in a matter of minutes. Outside, the small town lay buried under layers of ice and snow. But inside the diner, golden lights glowed warmly, and the rich scent of fresh coffee filled the air. James pushed the door open, stepping inside like he belonged there. Olivia followed, pulling her coat tighter around her. A middle-aged woman wearing a name tag that read Hannah Scott turned around, raising an eyebrow in mild surprise. "Bringing someone in at this hour? That's not like you, James." Olivia felt Hannah's gaze land on her, curious but not intrusive. Just the look of someone who had lived in this town long enough to know every familiar face. "She was stranded in the storm," James said simply, pulling out a chair and gesturing for Olivia to sit. For the first time in hours, her breath finally steadied. She had no idea where she was going or what would happen next. But at this moment, sitting in a quiet diner, with a mysterious man and an observant dog, she was no longer alone. The only question left was, what awaited her next? "My name is Emma." Olivia heard herself say the name, and for a moment it felt like a fragile shield. No longer Olivia Williams, the esteemed daughter of the Green family. This name carried no past, no chains of carefully laid out plans. James Anderson didn't react right away. He simply watched her, his deep eyes searching as if trying to determine whether it was true. But in the end, he just gave a small nod. "All right, Emma." Just one word, yet it brought her an inexplicable sense of relief. They left Blue Ridge Diner while the blizzard still raged outside. The wind howled through the trees, but James drove with an unnerving calmness. Inside the truck, warmth from the heater spread through the cabin, and Rocky curled up beside her, radiating a small but comforting presence. "So, where am I taking you?" Olivia froze at the question. Where? She had no answer. She couldn't check into any hotel without leaving a trail. She had no real friends, no one to turn to. She had run, but she had never considered where she would stop. Maybe James sensed her hesitation. "Listen, I have a small cabin just outside town, right by the woods. If you need a place to stay for a while." She turned to look at him. He didn't ask questions, didn't push for the truth. He simply offered a choice. And that, more than anything, made her feel safe. "Thank you. I don't even know what to say." James just shrugged. "Then don't say anything." The Maplewood cabin came into view under the truck's headlights. A small but cozy place, standing alone against the backdrop of untouched wilderness. Olivia stepped inside, immediately enveloped by the warmth from a crackling fireplace. It wasn't the cold grandeur of a mansion, but the kind of warmth that came from a place someone actually lived in. Old books lined the shelves, a well-worn armchair with a blanket draped over it. A faded photo of an elderly couple rested on the mantel. James set the keys down on the table and turned to her. "I'll sleep on the couch. You can take the bedroom. The door locks from the inside, if that makes you feel safer." She didn't know what to say. He didn't have to do this, but he did. No demands, no expectations. I won't bother you, Emma. And somehow, that made her trust him even more. That night, Olivia lay in an unfamiliar bed, staring at the wooden ceiling, listening to the wind whistling outside the window. She should have felt anxious, on edge, but instead, for the first time in a long while, she felt less alone. The only question was, how long could this life last before the past caught up to her? Morning light filtered through the cabin's curtains, casting a soft glow over Olivia's face. She blinked awake, taking in the simple room James had let her stay in. No gilded four-poster bed, no silk sheets, no servants tiptoeing in to place a morning tea tray. Just the faint scent of coffee and an unfamiliar, yet strangely peaceful quiet. She pulled on the thick flannel jacket James had lent her the night before and stepped out of the room. In the kitchen, James was already there, flipping slices of toast on a cast-iron pan. "Coffee's over there. Help yourself." He didn't even look up. Olivia paused. No one serving her. No fine china. No elegantly decorated cups. She slowly walked to the counter, poured herself a cup, and took a tentative sip. Bitter, strong, rough, but somehow it made her feel more awake than she had in years. James slid a plate of toast toward her, then leaned against the counter, watching her with an unreadable expression. "I've got work at the garage today. If you want, you can tag along." Olivia arched a brow. "Garage? You mean a repair shop?" James smirked. "What did you think I'd do for a living?" His eyes held a flicker of amusement. "You can sit here all day and wait, or you can step outside and see how the real world works." 30 minutes later, Olivia found herself standing inside Anderson's garage and realizing this was a world completely different from her own. No grand chandeliers, no tailored suits or five-star dinners, just the clank of metal, the sharp scent of oil and gasoline, and men in rolled-up sleeves, their hands stained with grease. She felt out of place. This wasn't a place for someone like her. But then, James turned to her smirking. "Ready to learn, princess?" Olivia folded her arms, lifting her chin in defiance. "Don't call me that. And yes, I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty." James raised a brow, clearly amused, before tossing her a rag. "Good. Let's get started." At first she was clumsy. The bolts were stubborn, the tools were heavy, and the mechanics of an engine were completely foreign to her. But James never lost patience. He guided her through every step, teaching her how to check the oil, recognize worn-out brake pads, and tell when an engine was on its last breath. "Here, don't use too much force. Feel it instead." He stepped behind her, placing his hands over hers, adjusting her grip. It lasted only a second, but the warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her. She realized then, no one had ever taken the time to teach her anything like this before. By the end of the day, Olivia slumped onto an old bench in the garage, her sleeves smudged with grease, her hair slightly tousled. She exhaled, glancing down at her hands, streaked with oil and grime. James sat beside her, taking a sip of water. "So, princess, what did you learn today?" Olivia shot him a glare but ended up laughing. "That fixing cars isn't as easy as I thought." James tilted his head, smiling slightly. "Do you regret it?" She looked down at her hands, remembering the years spent in pristine rooms, where her hands were always spotless, but never truly useful. Shaking her head, she let a small smile slip. "Number for the first time. I actually feel like I did something real." James Anderson leaned against the workbench at Anderson's garage, arms crossed, his gaze sharper than usual. He had let Olivia, or rather Emma, stay at his place, helping her start a new life. But from the beginning, he had known something wasn't right. She wasn't like the women who occasionally passed through this town. She wasn't just some lost traveler caught in a storm. James had been watching her. She was adapting to the garage, getting used to the rhythm of this world. But the little details still betrayed her. The way she instinctively avoided talking about her past. The way she tensed every time an unfamiliar car pulled up outside. And most of all, the way she never quite met his eyes whenever he asked why she was here. Today he was done waiting for answers. "You're not just any Emma, are you?" Olivia's head snapped up, her back stiffening instinctively. What do you mean? James sighed, setting down the grease-stained rag. I'm not an idiot, Olivia. She held her breath. He had never called her that before. I don't care where you're from or what you're running from, but if you want to stay here, I need the truth. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. She could lie. Again. But what was the point? She met his gaze. His eyes held no judgment, only patience. And so she spoke. My real name is Olivia Williams. Her voice was quiet, but firm. I'm the daughter of Alexander Green. James didn't blink, but she saw his jaw tighten slightly. He knew that name. Who didn't know that name? Alexander Green, one of the most powerful businessmen, a man with enough money to pull strings in politics and the law. James exhaled slowly, setting his coffee cup down on the table. So let me get this straight. You're a billionaire's daughter, yet you're hiding in my garage, working under the hood of old trucks. There's a missing piece to this story, Olivia. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. I'm running away from my own life, from a marriage I didn't choose. A long silence stretched between them. James studied her for a moment before letting out a short, humorless laugh. Let me guess. The guy was part of one of your father's business deals? Olivia blinked. She hadn't expected him to figure it out so quickly. James shook his head. Men like your father, I've seen too many of them. She said nothing, but he wasn't finished. Why didn't you fight back? With all the money and power your family has, you could have gotten out on your own. You think I didn't try? Olivia's voice cracked, years of frustration spilling out. I did. But you don't get it, James. In my world, everything has a price, including people. I was never an individual. I was a chess piece, a tool to secure power. I never had a choice. And if I hadn't run... She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. James was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, steadier. And you think hiding here is the answer? Olivia glanced down at her hands, still smeared with grease from the truck she had been working on. I don't know. James nodded slowly. So, what now? It was the question she had never really asked herself. She had been running, but she had never planned where she would stop. She lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes. I don't want to go back. James held her stare, and for the first time, he didn't just see fear in her eyes. He saw hope. But the real question was, would her father let her go that easily? Text message. Come back now. Don't make me come find you. Olivia's fingers clenched around the phone, her heartbeat stalling. She had known this moment would come. She had expected it. But seeing those words sent a cold dread crawling through her, a chain she thought she had broken, tightening around her once more. She could almost hear her father's voice, Alexander Green, in her head, cold, commanding. There was no request in that message, only an order. James stepped into the kitchen, his sharp gaze immediately catching the shift in her expression. What's wrong? She wasn't sure if she could say it, if she should drag him into this. But then she remembered. He had told her he wouldn't walk away. My father knows where I am. James was silent for a few seconds, his jaw tensed, fists tightening at his sides. He won't let this go. Olivia swallowed hard, her throat dry. I know. But that wasn't the worst part. Meanwhile, at Blue Ridge Diner, Chloe Brown, one of the few real friends James had, pushed open the diner's door, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She had worked here long enough to know every familiar face in town. Tonight, there were two who didn't belong. They sat in the corner, not ordering anything but black coffee, dark suits, stone-cold faces. They looked casual, but Chloe could tell. They were watching. Every woman who walked through the door was subtly measured, assessed. She didn't need to ask to know who they were looking for. Moving quickly, she stepped out of the diner, pulling out her phone and dialing James's number. The second he picked up, she spoke fast. They're here. Two guys, look like bodyguards, asking around about a woman traveling alone. James clenched his jaw. Sebastian and Henry. He didn't need to hear more. Thanks, Chloe. But listen, stay out of this. Don't let them suspect you know anything. Do I look stupid to you? Chloe snapped. But James, they're going to find her soon. Do you have a plan? James hung up, turning to Olivia. She had heard everything. Her face had gone pale. They're here. No more time. No more hiding. James yanked open a drawer, pulling out a set of car keys. We need to go. Now. Olivia blinked. Go where? They'll find me no matter where I run. Not if we make them believe you already left town. He turned to her, his expression sharp, as if he had been planning this from the start. Do you trust me? Olivia met his gaze. Maybe she didn't have many choices. But maybe, for the first time in her life, she was choosing to trust someone. She nodded. I trust you. And with that, they disappeared into the night, before it was too late. The knock came, steady, unhurried, but heavy with intent. James and Olivia had been waiting for this moment. Ever since Chloe's warning about the two men looking for her, they knew they couldn't run forever. James stood, his gaze sharp as he looked at Olivia. Are you sure about this? Olivia took a deep breath, her fingers clenching into fists. She had spent her entire life running, trapped in a gilded cage built by her father. But this time, she wouldn't run. She nodded. I'm sure. James didn't ask again. He walked to the door, pulled it open, and came face to face with Sebastian and Henry. Two towering men, the kind who were used to giving orders, not negotiating. Sebastian smirked, unsurprised. James Anderson, I should have guessed you'd be a problem. James leaned against the doorframe, making no move to step aside. I'm just doing what's right. Unlike some people who drag women back to places they don't want to be. Henry stepped forward, his voice low, almost civil. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to take her home. James folded his arms, his smirk laced with defiance. The problem is, she doesn't want to go. Sebastian sighed and turned his gaze past James, straight to Olivia. Miss Williams, you know you can't hide forever. Your father has already given you too much freedom. Freedom? Olivia's jaw tightened. They actually believed she had freedom? Every word, every veiled threat her father had ever used to control her echoed in her mind. Her whole life, she had never had a choice, never had the right to say no. But today, that would change. She inhaled deeply, stepping toward the doorway. For the first time, she faced the men who had always been part of her fears. I'm not going anywhere. A dangerous silence filled the air. Sebastian blinked, as if caught off guard by her defiance. Do you even know what you're doing? Olivia's voice remained steady. I do, and I'm not going back. Henry's expression darkened, his voice turning cold. Olivia, your father doesn't take kindly to being defied. I don't care what he likes anymore. The tension in the air thickened, like a lit fuse waiting to explode. James stepped forward, standing beside Olivia, his voice calm but edged with warning. You heard her. She's not leaving. And if you two keep standing here, we're going to have a real problem. Sebastian held James's gaze, then glanced back at Olivia. 1 second. 2 seconds. Finally, he smirked. Very well. But do you really think this ends here? He turned, Henry following silently. As they stepped back, Sebastian's parting words hung in the air. We'll be back. James didn't move until the sleek black car disappeared down the road, vanishing into the darkness beyond town. But the tension didn't leave. Olivia exhaled shakily, only now realizing how hard her body was trembling. James turned to her. You okay? She met his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. I've never felt better. But deep down, she knew. The real battle was only just beginning. The sky was a dull gray, a warning of the coming storm, but Olivia no longer felt the cold. The events at Maplewood Cabin still echoed in her mind. Sebastian and Henry had left, but not without a warning. They would be back, and she knew her father would not stop. We have two choices. James's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood by the kitchen counter, his deep blue eyes darker than usual, filled with quiet intensity. You can keep running, disappear for good. I can help you do that. He paused, studying her reaction before continuing. Or you can go back, end this on your own terms. Olivia clenched her fists. She had been running all her life, From lavish parties she never wanted to attend, from decisions that were never hers to make, from a marriage her father had forced upon her. But she couldn't run forever. If she kept hiding, her father would never stop. He would hunt her down no matter how far she went, and no matter where she disappeared to, she would always be living in fear. Olivia took a deep breath. I'm going back. James watched her for a moment, then nodded. Then we need a plan. The next morning, Ashton Manor. The riverfront estate loomed in front of her, grand and imposing, yet cold as ever. Olivia couldn't remember the last time she had walked through these gates without feeling like a prisoner. She remembered the endless dinners at a table so long she couldn't see the person sitting at the other end. The towering walls, not just meant to keep outsiders away, but to keep her locked inside. But this time, she wasn't here to be trapped. She was here to take her life back. James pulled the car to a stop outside the massive front gates. He turned to her. You sure about this? Olivia didn't hesitate. I'm sure. James held her gaze for a long moment before nodding. All right, I'll be right here. If anything goes wrong, I know. She gave him a small smile. Thank you, James. He didn't answer, but his eyes said more than words ever could. Inside the estate, the long hallway leading to Alexander Green's office felt suffocating, but no one stopped her. They had been ordered to let her return. The heavy wooden doors opened, revealing her father, seated behind his polished mahogany desk, his expression unreadable. So, you finally decided to come back. Olivia drew in a steady breath, meeting his gaze. I didn't come back to obey you. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, but he wasn't surprised. Then what do you want? Freedom. She enunciated each word clearly. You can't force me into that marriage. You can't control me forever. If you truly think I'm just another piece in your game, then you've underestimated me. Silence hung heavy in the room. Her father studied her, and then, to her shock, he let out a low chuckle. It seems my daughter has finally learned how to fight. Olivia held her ground, bracing for his resistance, for his threats. But instead he simply nodded. Fine. If that's your decision, I won't stop you. She froze. It was too easy. But Alexander leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. I want to see how far you can stand on your own. She knew then, this wasn't over. The battle wasn't won. But this was the first step. And for the first time in her life, she had won. The air in the office was colder than ever. The room was decorated with the finest luxury, yet Olivia had never once felt at home here. This was where her father sat, making decisions that could alter the fate of corporations, entire nations, and her own life. But today, for the first time, Olivia was no longer a pawn in his game. She stood across from her father without fear. I'm not your puppet anymore. Alexander Green sat behind his desk, his sharp gaze assessing her, as if she were a product to be evaluated. You think you can go against me? His voice wasn't raised, nor was it angry, just filled with the absolute certainty that he was the one who would win. Olivia pressed her lips together. She knew men like her father weren't easily convinced, but she didn't need his permission. She only needed to claim her own freedom. I'm not fighting you. I'm simply choosing my own path. Alexander remained silent for a moment before leaning back in his chair, arms crossing over his chest. And what exactly do you plan to do, Olivia? She had thought about this. When she left Maplewood Cabin, when she sat in the car with James, when she looked back on a life where every decision had been made for her. She already knew the answer. I'm going to live my own life, without your wealth, without this family's name, and without a marriage I never chose. She paused, locking eyes with him. You've controlled me long enough, and now you won't anymore. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. Olivia saw something shift in his expression. For the first time, a flicker of doubt. She had once believed she could never stand against him, that she was too small, too powerless compared to the influence he wielded. But now, looking into his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before. He was losing control. Alexander exhaled slowly, placing his hands on the desk, fingers interlaced. So this is your final decision? Yes. He nodded, slowly, thoughtfully, as if calculating his next move. Then he smiled. Not a warm smile, not a pleased one, but the smile of a man who had just watched a chess piece leave his board. Good. His response caught Olivia off guard. No argument, no threats, no wielding his power to force her back. Just one word. She blinked. You're not going to stop me? Alexander stood, walking toward the window. I could stop you, Olivia, but a smart man doesn't waste his efforts on battles he's already lost. He turned to her, his gaze razor sharp. If you truly believe you can survive without this name, then prove it. A challenge. But for the first time, Olivia didn't feel threatened. She had won. She left the estate without looking back. As she stepped past the massive iron gates, where James was waiting in the car, she felt something she never imagined she could feel after leaving this place. Relief. She had given up everything, the wealth, the status, the life that everyone thought was perfect. But for the first time, she had everything. James opened the car door, studying her for a long moment. Well? Olivia took a deep breath, then smiled. I'm free. The cold wind brushed against Olivia's skin as she stepped through the gates of Ashton Manor, but this time she didn't shiver in fear. She took a deep breath, feeling as though the invisible chains that had bound her for so long had finally been broken. James leaned against the car, his sharp blue eyes watching her. He didn't say a word. He simply opened the door, as if he already knew her answer. She got in without hesitation. There was nothing left to hold her back. They drove back toward town, heading for Maplewood Cabin. Olivia stared out the window as the snow-covered trees blurred past under the fading evening light. She replayed everything that had happened just hours ago. She had faced her father, and he couldn't stop her. Her whole life, she had believed he held absolute power over her, that she could never escape. But in the end, his power was never greater than her own choice. She had won. What are you thinking about? James's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to look at him. He had always been here. When she was stranded in the storm, when she was panicked and being hunted, when she was battling the weight of her past, James had been there. Even when she hadn't realized she needed someone. I've never felt this free before. He was quiet for a moment, then gave a small smile. Then maybe you're finally heading in the right direction? She laughed softly. Maplewood Cabin welcomed them back with its familiar warmth. Olivia stepped inside, pulling off her coat, letting the heat from the fireplace wrap around her. Everything about this place was simple. No luxury, no extravagance. But it was real. She glanced around and it hit her. She hadn't just found freedom, she had found a place where she belonged. And more than that, she had found someone who truly cared. James poured her a cup of coffee, setting it down on the wooden table in front of her. So what's next? Olivia took a breath, letting the warmth of the mug seep into her fingers. Her entire life, every plan had been made for her. But this time, it was her choice. She met James's gaze and said slowly, I don't know yet, but I want to stay, at least for now. James didn't seem surprised, but she caught something in his eyes, something unspoken, yet unmistakable. She hadn't just found a place to hide. She had found someone. And maybe that was the truest kind of freedom. Life lessons from Olivia's journey. Olivia's story is not just about escaping an arranged marriage or breaking free from her father's control. It is a journey of self-discovery, a battle to reclaim the right to her own life. And from that journey, there are valuable lessons that all of us can learn. 1. Freedom is not given, it must be taken. Olivia was born into wealth and status, yet she was never truly free. Every aspect of her life had already been decided for her. Who she had to be, who she had to love, how she had to live. But freedom does not come from living in a predetermined path. It comes from having the power to choose your own way. Like Olivia, many of us are bound by expectations, fear, or the limitations others place upon us. But in the end, no one has the right to decide our lives except us. 2. Facing fear is the only way to overcome it. There were countless moments when Olivia could have kept running, but if she had, she would have never truly escaped her father. He would have always found her, no matter where she went. Instead of fearing him, she chose to stand her ground. Life is the same way. We fear failure, judgment, and change. But running away doesn't make fear disappear. It only delays the inevitable. Only by facing our fears can we take control of our own destiny. 3. Sometimes you have to let go to gain more. Olivia walked away from everything others believed was valuable. Wealth, power, a life of luxury. But what she gained was worth far more. Freedom, peace, and someone who truly cared about her. Society teaches us that success means having more. More money, more recognition, more status. But in reality, true happiness often lies in the simplest things. A life we choose, a person who truly understands us, and a place where we belong. 4. We always have a choice. There were moments when Olivia believed she had no choice, that she had to obey her father, follow the life that had been set for her. But the truth is, she always had a choice. She just needed the courage to take it. In life, we may feel stuck, but if we look closer, there is always a way out. We are never truly trapped. We just need to be brave enough to take the first step. Olivia's journey is not just a story about running away. It is a story of growth, courage, and love. And most importantly, it is a story that reminds us, happiness is not about finding a perfect life. It's about finding a life that truly belongs to us.